84% of the time, when secret pornography use is discovered in a relationship, that is discovered by accident by a spouse or partner, which generates in a relationship a crisis.
How prevalent then would you say porn addiction has become?
By the time a lot of our clients are reaching adulthood, they've been viewing pornography sometimes for years and years. If you think about pornography as a kind of proxy for intimacy, pornography is never going to reject me. So It gives me as the user all the power, all the control, and that inevitably is bad for relationships.
Let's get some hope in here. Let's pivot to some recovery stories.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I can promise you that I would not be doing this work if there wasn't hope and good news at the end of it.
Cat Etherington, welcome to Couple Goals. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're on the podcast where we chat to couples and experts about all things relationships. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you are a part of the Naked Truth Project. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what your involvement in that is?
Yeah, so I'm the Director for Recovery with Naked Truth Project, and we are a UK-based but internationally operating charity. Our aim is to open eyes and free lives from the damaging impacts of pornography. And so our work is really focused on those two aspects of opening eyes, which is education and awareness. So in our Open Eyes work, we have people who are talking to secondary school children about pornography and sexualized media. We talk to parents. We have parental workshops to help parents navigate raising children in the digital world. We do conferences, and kind of just our goal is to start a conversation about pornography in the places where that needs to happen. So that's Open Eyes. I look after our Free Lives work, which is for people who have become caught up in problematic sexual behavior, pornography use, in ways that is either damaging them or their relationships or their families, and us kind of seeking healing and recovery from that.
Brilliant. And actually, that's one of the reasons we really wanted to talk to you, because at Care for the Family, we often have contact from couples who are dealing with this very issue of porn use for various reasons. So we really want to talk to you about that. Before we get into that, just so our listeners are clear, when we say porn, what do we mean? What is the current context for the word porn?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that even that question and the answer to that question is kind of shifting on a almost daily basis in today's digital world, right?
Yeah.
So, if you'd have asked me that question when I was in my teen years, I would have said probably magazines was like the most prevalent form of pornography available. Video pornography was around, but just not as prevalently as it is today. And so, today we're talking about high-speed, unlimited and unregulated video content, but we're also talking about lots of other types of kind of media. Erotic literature has really kind of moved on since I was a teenager. Things like OnlyFans and those kind of user-generated content. So, largely you could define pornography as explicit material designed for the purposes of sexual stimulation. And I would suggest that some of the clients that we work with are also using stuff that probably doesn't really qualify as pornography, but the way that they're interacting with it is causing it to be kind of within that category.
How prevalent then would you say porn addiction, if that's the right term, has become? Is it on the rise? What do we mean by porn addiction? Could you help us out with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a controversial identifier in as much as the sort of therapy world doesn't agree on whether pornography would qualify as an addiction or kind of a compulsive behavior. And, to your average person on the street, do they know the difference between an addiction and a compulsion? Probably not. How much does that matter? Is a debate for the academic world, perhaps. But certainly what we are seeing seeing is a steady and ever increasing number of people reaching out for help with problematic pornography use that they are often describing as an addiction. And I guess the reason that our clients are using that language is because that's what they understand as doing a thing that you don't really want to do or that is causing issues in your life and not being able to stop doing it. So when they're reaching out for help, they're definitely using that language of addiction. And in terms of prevalence, it's inevitable that as pornography has increased in prevalence, and with that increase in prevalence has come an increase in earlier exposure. And so, by the time a lot of our clients are reaching adulthood, they've been viewing pornography sometimes for years and years, sometimes from 12 or pre-12. And so, it's much easier to generate problematic or addictive or compulsive pornography use than it used to be. You really had to work hard to get addicted to pornography when you had to walk down to the newsagents and go eyeball to eyeball with the lady behind the counter to get your hands on a magazine, right? And so the culture around this has really, really changed.
Yeah, barriers have been removed, haven't they?
Yeah.
Right.
I guess some of the misconceptions we can have about porn are that it's predominantly a male problem. Is that still the case, or is that something that you've seen a shift in?
Yeah, I would say it's one of the most prevalent misconceptions that this is a man-only or a male-only problem. It hasn't been a male-only problem for a really long time. And disproportionately, the men are represented in the research as kind of consuming more pornography more frequently. But certainly we do work with women who are coming forward with issues with pornography. Anecdotally, I can tell you that erotic literature is more prevalent for women than it is for men. That seems to be part of the way that women are engaging with pornographic content. And I would guess that's because the vast majority of pornography is really made for men, and it represents a male perspective in terms of sex. And so women are not typically finding that as alluring as men might, and they're finding something in that erotic literature that I guess is more appealing to them. But certainly some of the research shows that 1 in 4 visitors to porn sites are female.
That's interesting, because I was wondering myself how reliable the statistics are in terms of how many women are engaging with it for that reason, because a lot of the content is aimed at men. But also, do more men seek help than women would, do you think?
That's certainly true in terms of looking at our client base. We work with vastly more men than we do with women. Maybe we run 1 female group for every 4, 5 or 6 male focused groups that we run. We've been running female groups for a really long time. We're very established there, and still we find that they're harder to fill. And that's not necessarily because there aren't women out there who need help. I think there's a lot more, where there are barriers for men, there are more barriers for women. And there seems to be higher degrees of shame because the conversation is largely focused around men. They often feel like, this is a man's problem and I'm experiencing it. That leads to more stigma. And so women typically are not as willing to come forward.
Okay, so I think we've done a decent job there of sort of laying out the landscape. So porn is far more prevalent than it ever has been before.
Yeah.
Therefore, porn addiction, or at least to use a different term, problematic porn use is on the rise because it is more accessible than it ever has been before. And it actually is more accessible. Well, no, women access it more than we would have previously thought. So in that context, then, let's get back to what we were saying earlier about care for the family and the people who contact us. So the sort of things that we get actually is couples are struggling because, generally speaking, the wife or the woman in the situation has found out that their husband or partner has been using porn. and it's just been a huge issue, and it's been really heartbreaking for them. And this is quite common for us. We hear this quite a bit. Is this something that you are dealing with yourself personally at Naked Truth? And how are you beginning these conversations with these people? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, let me say that there is research that suggests that when secret pornography use is discovered in a relationship, or really any kind of secret sexual behaviour, that about 84% of the time that is discovered by accident by a spouse or partner. So that's a huge number. We're not talking about confessions. We're not talking about sitting down and having open conversations at the beginning of relationships. We're talking about secrets that have been kept for sometimes really long periods of time. And, you know, those secrets are then discovered, which generates in a relationship a crisis. You know, it's not just I found out that you like, I don't know, salt and vinegar crisps, and I always thought that you liked cheese and onion ones. This is like a real kind of values conflict that generates a crisis of, do I really know my person? Because often they couldn't have imagined that would have been part of how they might express themselves sexually. So I wanted to sort of say that to begin with, because although that is shifting a little bit with our younger generation as porn's become more normalised, and therefore more open conversations are happening in relationships, typically it's a discovery of some kind, a finding of something on the computer or a third party telling somebody else. And this is a huge part of the work that we do at Naked Truth Project, because what we really understood, some of us personally from our own personal experiences, was that where there is someone using pornography problematically in secret in a way that might be compulsive or addictive, there is usually a partner or family around that person who is in some way, directly or indirectly, being damaged by that behaviour also. And I say directly or indirectly because I think there is, when you look at the research about the damaging impacts of pornography, I think there is an argument for, even when they don't know it's happening, there is the potential for damage within a relationship when someone is consuming high amounts of pornography.
What does that damage look like in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I mean, there's damage to the individual, and the research points to things like mental health issues. It talks about attitudinal changes. And so if you're using a lot of pornography, the way that you view sex and relationships and gender roles and all of that stuff can change. The way that you feel about yourself, your self-esteem, your body image, and the way that you judge others within that is also impacted. So there are lots of negative impacts from consuming pornography. And of course, that plays out within the context of a family and a relationship. And so in a marriage or a committed relationship, we see those differences in attitudes towards sex show up in the bedroom. Yeah, like, how can it not? And so being pressured into doing things that you maybe don't feel comfortable with, without lots of conversation, and kind of consent issues can become quite blurry. And I mean, even if you think about, can you consent to a sexual relationship when you don't have all of the information about how somebody is using their sexuality? I mean, that in and of itself is a conversation. So there's lots of ways that problematic porn use can damage a relationship. The other thing that's probably worth saying here, though, is like, it depends on what the person using pornography is using it for. Because when you get to the end of the spectrum that might be considered addictive or compulsive, it's not about sexual expression anymore. It's often about emotional regulation. It's about coping. It's about managing difficult emotions. And where that shows up in relationships is a huge impact on intimacy, my ability to know and be known by my partner, right? And so if somebody is using porn to manage their difficult emotions, they're not being vulnerable, they're not showing up authentically in the relationship, and they're using pornography as their outlet for those difficult emotions, and that stunts intimacy.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I think the default view, I think, of people who are going to porn is purely for sexual satisfaction, or they're looking for some sort of something from porn that they may not be getting elsewhere, whatever it is, from a sexual context. But no, I'd never really thought of from an emotional context. So they're going to porn and they're getting their emotional stability from that, or they're seeking something from that. I never would have thought of it from that perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's often to do with sort of low self-esteem, lack of relational confidence. Like, if you think about pornography as a kind of proxy for intimacy, right? Like, talking to girls is hard and risky, and I might get rejected. Pornography is never going to reject me. So, you know, I say this tongue-in-cheek in some ways, like, it kind of gives the best bits of the sexual relationship without the tough bits, right? So it never asks me a difficult question. It never says no. It never makes a demand of me. I'm never unable to perform in a way that I would like to perform. Like, it gives me as the user all the power, all the control, and I get to completely own that sexual experience without really having to consider anybody else, and that inevitably is bad for relationships.
It totally removes the sacrificial element of
absolutely
a loving relationship, doesn't it?
Well, also, like, the advent of, we could go on a full-on tangent here, but like the advent of like AI now, and like AI girlfriends and all this sort of stuff, that's just feeding into that even more, isn't it? Yeah,
there's a lot of danger
there. That's the future, I think, of the intimacy avoidant person. Is, you know, I generate a perfect relationship with a perfect being who never questions, never pushes back. That's really bad for human relationships.
Right. Oh, it's a horrific picture. What if you're someone who is using porn? At what point do you recognize, okay, this is a problem for me? This isn't just I've glanced at it, or I've happened to watch it, or what the occasional whatever. Not that we're defending that either, but at what point do you recognize this is something I'm relying on now?
Yeah. I mean, it's actually harder to do in a culture that is so normalized around pornography, right? So, you know, we talk sometimes about cognitive distortions, which I would sometimes call like permission-giving thoughts, the ideas and the thoughts that allow us to make choices that are not so good for us. And probably the most prevalent permission-giving thought is, well, everybody else is doing it, and they're doing it just as much as I'm doing it, and they're doing it all the time. And so if something is normal, there's a kind of an equation that people draw where they say, well, normal equals healthy. And I think we know that some behaviours that are normal in a culture are not necessarily automatically healthy. So I think what I would say to people is, you're looking out for losing control. So when you're sort of thinking, oh, I'm just going to do this for a little while, and you find that there's kind of escalation, I'm doing more of it, I'm doing it more frequently, I'm doing it for longer periods of time. I mean, sadly, by the time lots of people realise it's a problem, they've really crossed some major thresholds, and they're telling us, you know, I've been looking at pornography at work and I'm under disciplinary action because I couldn't not do it. So we're looking for those kind of early warning signals. I'm doing more than I thought I would. With escalation, you get, I'm looking at content that I never thought I would look at. And so just in the same way as you might see with a substance addiction, people change the substance, or they change the method of delivery. With pornography, you see people changing genres. They're going for something more edgy. They're going for something more extreme. And of course, in the very worst cases, that can take people into very, very dark corners of the internet that are hard to get out of. Relationally, I'm going to say look for secrecy. If you're lying a lot about it and you're hiding, and if you're shutting your laptop every time someone walks into a room, that's probably an indication that something is needing looked at. And also paying attention to some of those mental health markers that I mentioned earlier on. Are you noticing that you're feeling bad after watching pornography? Are you noticing that you're feeling a lot of shame? Are you noticing that you're losing interest in the things that you would normally want to be doing? Are you staying home so that you can look at porn instead of going to your family events? Those kinds of things.
So it can cause people damage, not just in the romantic relationships, but in their friendships and with their family and everything as well. So they could become more withdrawn and reclusive. That's quite interesting.
And also, like, if you've got a secret, and this is probably the side of the relationship stuff that doesn't get talked about enough. If you've got a secret that you really don't want people to find out, you're going to find ways to protect that secret. And that looks like lots of dishonesty. It looks like lots of what the word gaslighting, it kind of comes up a lot. This kind of distortion of reality. Did I see this on your phone? No, that wasn't what you thought it was. So there can be a lot of kind of manipulation of reality. In some cases, high levels of what you would consider sort of almost emotionally abusive behaviours while they're protecting this secret that they desperately don't want their person to discover. And that can happen with children too. I don't have a number for you, but I said 84% of the time it's an unexpected discovery, and some sub number in there is the kids found something on a computer or whatever, and so that happens too, where kids are kind of exposing one parent or the other and get caught up in the mess of that.
And how do you help the people who have made the discovery, basically? So what we hear at Care for the Family quite often is when they've discovered that their partner has been using porn, they feel betrayed, they feel rejected, just deeply hurt. What help do you bring to the person who feels like they've been betrayed?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question and framed it in that way, because we often talk about the irony in that space is the person that's been carrying that burden suddenly feels free and light, but what they've essentially done is dropped that burden on their loved one. And now I sometimes describe it, you know, when you go to a shopping centre and you've got those escalators, one's going up and one's going down. That's kind of what it feels like. There's this kind of crossing in the middle. And sometimes the person who's feeling free is just so like happy that it's all out in the open. They're like happily waving to their partner who's on the way down, like going, oh, I feel great, I feel so free, and their partner is drowning under this new information. And I used the word crisis before. It's really a crisis for the person who's making the discovery, particularly when they had an either implicit or explicit understanding that this relationship didn't include these behaviours. And I say implicit or explicit because a lot of couples are actually not having those conversations. They're not sitting down before they enter a serious relationship and saying, okay, should we talk about where we are with pornography? It feels like a betrayal because it somehow breaks the agreements that I felt like we had about monogamy and fidelity. And when that happens, for the person who is betrayed, it feels like the best word I could use is like it's a destabilizing effect on their entire sense of reality, because they're sort of looking at their person going, I don't think I know who you are. Like, I couldn't have imagined that this could have happened, and yet here it is. And if you're the person I know best in the world and you're not what I thought you were, then maybe I'm just reading the world wrong. Maybe I can't trust my own instincts. So it breaks trust with the person, but it also breaks trust with themselves. It's a huge event. And in fact, some of the research suggests that when that is sufficiently kind of present, that it can actually show up as kind of PTSD type symptomology, that people get kind of traumatized by it. And we use the language of betrayal trauma.
Right. So say someone has gone down that track and they've recognized they have got a problem. Is there hope? What is the way to recovery there? How do they manage to come back from that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely hope. That's why we do what we do, and we have seen just hundreds and thousands of stories of hope through the work that we've done. And we tend to work with people who are either at the place of having been found out that you guys talked about, or else they're recognizing some of those negative impacts in their life, and they're saying, I don't want this anymore. And so when they join our programs, they're looking for a way out, and there's lots that you can do in that space. I think what I would want people to understand is that, we talked about the function of pornography. If it is doing something for you that is helping you to cope, then we have to find out what that is, so that we can really work with, what do you do when you feel like low self-esteem or rejected, or you feel fearful? If right now what you're doing is going to porn to bolster your emotional stability, we need to find other strategies that can help with that. The other thing that's really important is community. Knowing, I think there's a lot of shame, right, just about the very nature of the thing that we're dealing with. And you'd be amazed at how many conversations I have with people where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to ask you like some personal questions, and it's probably going to feel a bit embarrassing and a bit humiliating, and often people are just really relieved to get to tell the truth about it. They're like, someone's not judging me, and so being in a community of other people who've had similar experiences is really great for kind of reducing shame, and therefore allowing honesty to develop.
Okay, I think that's a good place to have a break. When we come back, we want to explore this further, but we also want to talk about some practical things for couples to kind of get ahead of this, and think about those. So I know we've talked about before expectation and things like that, and also just what can people do if let's say the worst has happened and conversations need to be had. So we'll come back after the break and we'll get into it. Is your relationship on autopilot?
In the beginning, relationships can feel like the start of a new adventure, but without effort and intentionality, it's easy for couples to drift apart. If you want to invest in your relationship, you'll love Going the Distance, a marriage event from Care for the Family.
For the first time ever, we'll be joining the Going the Distance team with previous Couple Goals guests Catherine Hill, Kathy Madafan and Philip Janadu. Full of wisdom, humour and vulnerability, we'll be exploring the essential areas to help strengthen your marriage together.
We also have 2 great parenting events, as well as our sellout event hosted by our founder, An Evening with Rob Parsons.
All our events go on tour across the country, so to buy tickets or for more information, go to cff.org.uk/tour events. See you there. Welcome back, everybody. Before we carry on with this really interesting conversation, we just want to do a little shout out for anyone listening in. If you haven't subscribed yet, if you want to hear more really interesting topics on relationships, talking to experts like Kat, please subscribe. We've got loads more to come. Please find us on all the usual podcast places.
Yeah, you don't want to miss a single episode.
Absolutely. Right, Kat, awkward subscription bit out of the way. Let's continue with our conversation. So we've looked a lot at the impact that porn use has on relationships, how people feel betrayed, how it's more complicated than it just being an addiction. It's often a source of emotional dependency and things like that. So let's now look at what can people do to recover from this. So one question I know you really wanted to ask, LJ, so I'm going to let you ask it.
Yeah. I'll do this one.
Yeah, you'll do this one.
No, I was wondering, what you would say to someone who just suspected that their partner was accessing porn. So they haven't got any evidence to kind of lay on the table, but there's suspicions there. They've picked up on a few things and they're a bit concerned. How would you recommend they kind of broach that conversation in the best possible way with their partner?
Yeah, and that's actually a really tricky conversation, isn't it? To to bring up something that you're not totally sure about, and to risk getting that wrong, and to risk your person sort of feeling accused or shamed or whatever. I can see that that's a really tricky thing. What I suppose comes up for me as you ask that question is usually that's not coming from nowhere. And if you talk to people who maybe have discovered secret pornography use in their relationship, they, with the benefit of hindsight, they will look back and say, I knew something was wrong with that. I knew something was wrong with the changes I saw in the bedroom. I knew something was wrong with the way I was being talked to. I felt like there was some kind of external influence showing up here. Right. And so I think it's probably wise to stick with what you do know, what you can say, I've observed this and I'm concerned about it, worried about it. Can we have a conversation about it? It's always wise, I think, to express your own experience rather than trying to create a story on the other side of that. You might have suspicions about that, right? But you don't want to lead with, I think you're doing this. I think it's probably gentler and wiser to start with, these are the things I'm observing and this is how it feels for me. I will say that when there is secretive pornography use, there's often a kind of necessity to block empathy for your partner, right? Like it's really hard to have the I love my wife or husband box open at the same time that you're doing a behavior that you kind of know would be hurtful and damaging to them. And so you have to kind of close one box in order to open the other. And so what happens is when you bring this up or it's discovered in a relationship, it sort of bursts open those boxes for the person who's been working really hard to make sure they're never open at the same time. And that can feel painful, it can feel shameful. And so I guess what I'm really saying is there's no easy way to have these conversations. Right. And so like I would never want someone to feel shame about not doing the best possible job of that, because it's just a really, really hard one to do. But I would say don't put it off, because I have worked with lots of people who wish they'd said that thing 15 years ago and now in a position where we're 15 years further down the line and this is so much harder. So it is really important to bring it up. It's important to do that in a way that feels gentle and wise and stay in a place of curiosity, but it's also important to not feel terrible about it being a bit messy, because it has the potential to be a bit messy, right?
It's just recognizing this conversation isn't going to be fun. No matter how well you approach it, this is going to be hard.
And loads of us have like never learned how to even talk about sex openly, and so like even just going there in this area can feel really uncomfortable and a bit humiliating or shameful for a lot of people. So it's important to recognize the value of honesty over the value of comfort.
And I suppose conversely then, so what about the person who is using porn and feels guilty about it and wants to confess, and it's been a long time and it has built up over time? Is there anything they can do to try and approach the topic with their partner in a way that is as helpful as it can be?
Like, what's the best way to damage control that?
Right. Well, in some ways, the best way to damage control that is not to try too hard to damage control it, because what you then risk doing is minimizing and justifying, and all of those things cause extra relational damage. And so, if you can imagine your partner coming to you and saying, I've got this thing I want to tell you, and well, I only do it because I only do it when we're not having sex, or I only do it when you're not being very nice to me. That kind of subtle blame shifting, that subtle justification can actually cause a bit more relational damage. And so in some ways I would say kind of don't try too hard to damage control it. Try to be really honest about, this is what I'm doing, and I'm not good about doing it. I don't feel good about that. I want to stop. I know it's damaging to us. I do think, based on that 84% statistic, I do think it's better for the person who is keeping secrets to come forward with their secrets than to be discovered in them. arguably that doesn't necessarily make it feel like any less of a betrayal, but it does do something in that space of, you were never going to tell me unless I found out.
Right.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, they made a positive choice.
Yes.
Whereas if that positive choice had never happened, well, there's always going to be that what if,
Yes.
I suppose, from the other side, isn't there? Were you ever going to
And
tell
it
me?
really demonstrates I really have a strong desire to change, and I'm
Yes.
willing to take the risk of bringing this up. And the truth is, it is risky. There are some relationships where the secrets have been so intense that the other person can't really kind of get over that, and it does sadly end some relationships. And so it is a risk to bring that forward.
Yeah.
But you're communicating, I care more about our relationship than I care about keeping my secrets, and that can be for some people a game changer.
Yeah. So I suppose for the person who feels, I need to fess up to this, they're better off just owning it then, rather than trying to. Well, if you think about it from this perspective, like trying to justify it, as you say, just to accept I shouldn't have been doing this, and I'm sorry.
And often, like, their understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing it is unevolved in some way also, right? Like, if you are allowing yourself to keep a secret from the person you love most in the world, you're tying your brain in some sort of mental gymnastics to make that possible, right? You have to make up a story about why what I'm doing is okay in order to make peace within yourself
Justify
enough
it to
to
yourself.
do it, right? Yeah. And so typically, whatever that internal narrative is, those permission-giving thoughts I mentioned earlier, they're typically not accurate, they're not objectively true, and they're usually not that helpful. So I think starting with, this is what I'm doing, I don't want to be doing it anymore, and you can sort of figure out the story of that later on.
And when you have couples come to you for help, when all of this stuff has kind of come out, do they often come together or do they come separately? How does it work?
Yeah.
Both. I would say potentially, and I think this is kind of mirrored in what you were saying about the couples who contact you. Probably it's most likely that the partner reaches out first. If they're in that 84% where they've discovered something, they're hurting really badly, usually. And so they are most likely the person who's going to reach out first. And they're sort of basically saying, can you fix my person? Can you make them stop doing the thing that is hurting me and hurting our relationship? Sadly, it's usually not as straightforward as that, and everybody needs help, right? Individually and together. But we do a lot of work with couples, and typically what they need first is just help stabilizing the crisis. I'm using that word again. It's like their relationship has been rocked to its foundations. There's often high levels of conflict, there's big emotions, and so often the very first thing you're doing is just trying to create a little bit of stability and safety within the relationship so you can get them talking to each other nicely and learning how to support one another through those big emotional experiences.
Right. Okay, let's pivot. Let's get some hope in here. Let's pivot to some recovery stories. So obviously you are in the business of helping couples recover from this trauma. What does that look like? What is the road to recovery? How is that laid out? And share some good news.
Yes. Yeah, I can promise you that I would not be doing this work if there wasn't hope and good news at the end of it, because why would anybody want to be doing that? I want to tell you that we see single people and married people and, users and partners every day of our working week who are turning this stuff all the way around. In fact, and I'm always cautious about saying this because if you're a couple kind of caught in the middle of this, what I'm going to say next is going to feel like nonsense, but there are couples who would come out the other side and say our relationship is actually better than it's ever been in the past because we didn't know what we didn't know about what we were missing, what we needed. We talked about that intimacy issue earlier on. When you take porn out of the equation and you support people to work on their hurts and their woundedness that maybe has brought them to this place in the first place, you can often transform a relationship, not just kind of back to where it was, but actually better than it could have ever been before, because the crisis reveals the stuff, right, that needs to be kind of worked on. And a lot of couples in this space will talk about kind of relationship one is dead. We kind of can't go back to where we were before, but there is this unique opportunity to really build something brand new where you're being really intentional about what are the values we want to live by, what kind of life are we looking for, what kind of relationship. Maybe we weren't intentional about that conversation before, but now we can really design this relationship. And so there are couples who are thriving post betrayal. It's not just surviving, they're really thriving and building something beautiful for themselves.
Great.
That's amazing.
Oh, brilliant. And how does the recovery process begin? Like we've probably talked on quite a bit of this already, but is that counselling sessions? Is that practical advice, things that need to change at the home?
Yeah. I think it really depends on, and one of the key questions for people is like, what is the function of this behaviour? If it truly is that it's a little bit of a habit, I just like looking at pornography, but now I'm realising it's not that good for me, I'm feeling uncomfortable about the direction that it's going, it may be that practical interventions are enough to kind of get that under control for somebody. For other people, if it's really been a primary coping strategy, if it's something that they've really come to depend on for their emotional stability, then it's going to be more than that. They're going to need some practical help kind of cutting porn out of their lives, but then they're going to need some support in terms of figuring out, okay, if I've been using pornography to cope with low self-esteem, what am I going to do now with that low self-esteem that I'm left with? And sometimes I use the idea of like, if porn is your anesthetic and we take it away, then we find out what hurts and we have to try to do some work there. And so for those people, it might be that counselling or therapy is helpful. We do a lot of group work, which is really helpful for our clients, because often in group, somebody else will say something that I didn't even know that I didn't know about myself until you said it out loud. And now I'm like, oh, okay. It's really kind of helps with that self-reflection. And same for partners. I mean, I think a lot of partners, like I said, they want you to fix the person who's doing the thing so that they feel better. But actually, there is damage created by that betrayal experience that they sometimes need to go and work on. They need to work on rebuilding trust with themselves. They need to work on living in a world where there's ambiguity around people's trustworthiness. Like, it can feel quite scary to imagine, can I trust anybody in the world? And so there is repair work that needs to happen for the partner too. And then there's like this messy middle of how are we bringing back together our relationship with honesty and openness, and that can feel like its own beast to tame too. But like I said, some of that work is really beautiful when you get couples really communicating on a deeper level. They're not just arguing about a thing, they're expressing kind of what's deeper for them, and often that's really kind of deep stuff.
That's really helpful. That sometimes just to know that porn could be the plaster that you've put on top of a deeper wound, and removing that can uncover what the issue actually was underneath all along. And it's amazing that you're able to provide people with help and solutions for the trauma or whatever other issues are going on underneath the surface of that.
And you can recover.
And you can see how if we stop at the practical, right, like just don't take your phone upstairs, don't take your phone into the bathroom, put the computer in a public space, get some porn blockers on your computer, all of that is fine, and maybe an important part of the picture. But actually, if we leave you with then open pain, sometimes you'll just find a new way to medicate that. And so we want more for people than that.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. And I suppose it's also important just to lay the foundations before this becomes a problem, which I know you're quite passionate about. So what would you recommend to couples who they've just got married, they're committed to each other, the beginning of their relationship, how should they approach this particular area of their lives so that they don't have to have the difficult conversations later?
Yeah, what ways can you safeguard your marriage?
Safeguard.
Yeah. I wish people were having this conversation when they were dating, actually. I wish that, where they were maybe talking about, hey, maybe one day we'll get married and, are you a person who wants to have children or not have children? Those kinds of conversations are happening. I would love to see the porn conversation, the how do we feel about monogamy, the what does it mean to you to be in a monogamous relationship conversations much earlier, like pre-marriage. And I guess, in today's world, how likely is it that you're going to meet someone who's never seen pornography? Probably not very likely, truth be told. And, that might feel like a sad truth, but it's probably true. And actually, interestingly, slight side note, our younger couples that we're working with, what's different about their experience is that they probably are having more of those conversations. But what I think a lot of people make the mistake of believing is that marriage will fix a porn issue.
Right.
I won't need it when I get married. And sometimes they find that actually they're not able to set it aside once they get into a relationship. And then over time, that kind of secrecy evolves in a relationship that started perhaps in a more honest place. And so, all that to say, I'd like to see people talking about it way earlier and making their agreements way earlier and being really honest about that. Because part of the problem is that we never talked about it. I made an assumption that you were here and it turns out that you're here. And now I feel like I kind of got duped or made a mistake or whatever that is. Or the person who's been using pornography is like, well, you never said you didn't like it or you had a problem with it. And so you could just kind of clear that up by having honest conversations. And elevating honesty over comfort, right? Like, it's going to probably feel a bit awkward to bring it up, but it could be a really important thing.
Yeah. It just gets me thinking, why aren't people talking about it? Because if porn is so prevalent, so we're all aware of it, and it's, becoming normalized, and as you say, it sounds like younger couples are talking about it. Why do you think it isn't brought up at the dating phase? So like we did marriage prep and we were dating and we talked about, what do we think of kids and where we're going to live and all those other big questions and like what are our priorities. But at the same time, that didn't seem to be an obvious question to ask.
No, I know.
But as we talk
really
about
on my radar.
it feels like, this feels really obvious that we should be talking about this. So why do you think it's not?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with kind of who is preparing material for premarital couples. And, I wouldn't have thought to have those conversations. And I think a lot of people, we assume that other people are in a similar place to us with some of these issues, right? And so, like, if it's just not something that's ever been a problem for you or you're not particularly interested in pornography, you might not even think to put it on a piece of paper that you might give to a couple in your life that you care about. For me, I have daughters who are hitting their 20s and I'm super tuned into, okay, you are like the internet generation who are raised as digital natives, and so there's no question for me that I want my daughters to be having those conversations with the men that they are looking to get into serious relationships with. So I do think it's a bit of a generational thing, and I think that probably we will see that change over time, but I also think a lot of it is just like, it never even occurred to me because it's not part of my worldview. Anecdotally, I could tell you that I think for a lot of women, because it is still less prevalent for women, there are lots of women out there who just like porn is just not a thing. And so they assume that it's not a thing for other people too.
Yeah. Yeah, we just need to face up to the fact we're not that young anymore, sweetheart.
I know. When you said it's a generational thing, I was like, you're not applying that to us, surely.
I mean, we've been married nearly 14 years now,
Yeah.
The digital landscape has changed a lot, hasn't it?
And it changes like the even that experience of betrayal that we talked about earlier, because, you know, our younger generations, our 20-somethings into their early 30s, are probably more likely to say, oh, no, they did tell me. They did tell me that they, you know, had a struggle with pornography. We'd had those open conversations. And so, and like they're taking a stance of support. Like, I want to support you in this. And then over time, as that continues and sort of erodes away at that trust, it can be even more difficult to bring that up as a sort of sense of betrayal, because, well, it was part of the picture when I signed up. So, you know, that creates its own complexities in comparison to I didn't know and I could never have guessed, and here we are 40 years later. So it's all very subjective to the couple's personal experiences.
Yeah, and their own ideas of their expectations and values and assumptions of where their partner's at as well.
Yeah, and I wonder as well, culturally, I'm going to go off on one year, I'm going to do my best, but I often as well wonder, is there a pressure to not seem prudish? Because it's almost seeing like watching porn is almost like an enlightened thing, and we're sort of, you know, trying to remove taboos about sex and
the sexual revolution
and all that sort of stuff. So I wonder, is there sort of, well, I don't want to sound like I'm against it because I don't want you to think that I'm some primitive prude. Is that something you're seeing? I think that's
absolutely true. Yeah, absolutely. And I will say again, I do think that's more prevalent for women. I think that in general, the message that all men look at porn and it's normal and we draw that equal sign to therefore healthy. I think there are a lot of women who feel like they've lost their voice in that, and to say I don't want to be in a relationship with pornography as part of the picture is to cut themselves off from options. Like, how am I ever going to find a husband if everyone's doing it? And so it feels like almost like a risky thing to say, but I actually think there are certainly, you know, the women that we're working with, if they'd been sat down at the early stages and said, well, you know, I'm going to look at pornography 3 times a week for the entirety of our relationship, are you in? They probably would have said no, thank you.
That's really helpful.
Really helpful. Yeah. No, I think what you've said there about recovery and the fact that there is so much hope to be had having these conversations with people like yourself, and that it's not just a case of they recovered and they're doing okay, they're stronger for it and they're thriving. So I just think that's a really good place to end this episode on a real good message of hope. Yes. So if anyone is struggling, if anyone wants to hear more about Naked Truth and what you guys are doing, which is incredible work, we've worked with you guys before and other things that Care for the Family. Can you tell us a little bit more information about where we can find you and what's going on?
Yeah, thanks. So you can look at our website, nakedtruthproject.com. There you can find all of the stuff about our education and awareness work. You can link through to our school's website, and you can also find some details about our recovery programs. We have recovery group programs for people who are using porn and looking to stop, for women who have been in relationships with men where pornography use has been a problem. And we also have groups for men which are sort of relationally focused, really specifically focusing around that. How do I rebuild trust after this? How do I kind of lean into being a support to my wife? So I'd sadly, because of the stuff I talked about earlier, our groups are a little gendered, but we do have groups for female users as well. We offer one-to-one coaching and counselling for people. So everything you need is there on the website, and we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you so much,
Cat Etherington, thank you so much. Really interesting chat.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.